Unilever, lots of other brands. Please welcome Ian and his panel.
Hello there. Thanks a lot. At Phenomenon, we're based out in LA, and as Ross just said, we're a brand innovation agency. We get involved in, God, everything a brand could possibly do. And running experience design and UX design has been, actually hearing the other talks here, what's been interesting about it is it actually puts the customer first, because whether you're creating a brand strategy or creating a product, as you'd imagine, understanding who your customer is key. We have an awesome panel of guys here. We got together and got to understand our backgrounds, and it's really quite a nice, diverse mix of backgrounds to talk about the subject. When I take a step back and I look at over the last 15, 20 years of this constant evolvement of the internet, and let's just say there's been several iterations of it. We were able to go from an informational web to a dynamic web to a mobile web, an informational web to a social web. And it does feel, with the promise and power, quite frankly, of AI, there's something big and it's imminent. And I think I was trying to come up with a thought here to kind of get us going as we get into our intros here. But it's really, I think, around control feels like the big topic. Where do we fit in? Does the big creative idea still control a lot of what our experiences are about? Or quite honestly, the customer themselves and their control? It's a big, juicy topic, which is awesome. So guys, if you could introduce yourselves, it would be awesome. And tell us about what you do and your role with AI. That would be awesome.
Hi, I'm Thomas Choi. I'm with RPA. We're a full-service agency based out of Santa Monica, California. I head up product there, which essentially means that I'm responsible for the work and the development of solutions that we put together on behalf of our clients. I will humbly profess that I am not an AI expert, so I don't know if that disqualifies me for the panel or not. But as far as our involvement, I think right now at this point, because everything's so undefined, the way I look at it is I just want to let my imagination run wild, right, in terms of what AI can do for our clients and our business. So it's definitely part of everyday thoughts and ideas that we put forth. And at some point in time, I guess what I would envision is that maybe I start off my day walking into the office and say, hey, Jarvis, or whatever we want to call it, let's do a marketing mix modeling exercise, right? And then just have a conversation with the system that connects all of these different tools that we have at our disposal and ultimately construct something. And to your point about, is this something that we should be controlling? Absolutely. I think that's what I envision AI, doing and being for us is maybe a single point of entry that allows us to use all of these things that sit within our tech stack and ultimately surface insights and garner the most incredible and valuable data that we have at our fingertips.
Bruce. Hi, I'm Bruce Kiernan. I am the head of M Platform at MEC, recently rebranded to Wavemaker. So we are a media agency, and my role has been really grounded in data, programmatic, really trying to take a lot of the great insights that we've been collecting as an industry and that our clients have been collecting as marketers for many years now, and really trying to put that into practice in a meaningful way. So that involves customizing, the consumer experience, making sure that we have a smart and sound investment approach against every data point that's relevant to that particular user, and really centering everything around, the cornerstone of our business, which is the consumer journey. Just making sure that we are informing, every step of the way, every touch point that consumers kind of hit upon as they make their way towards a purchase or some sort of brand interaction, and all of the different resources that we have at our disposal, both from our clients, from the marketplace, and within our proprietary tools, are designed to inform and progress that consumer journey.
Chris Paquette, CEO and co-founder of Deep Intent. Deep Intent's a integrated marketing platform. I was one of the guys that built it, so I have some hands-on experience with AI. Hopefully that brings some technical perspective to the conversation.
Done.
But yeah, we focus on using AI and unique data to identify hard-to-reach target audiences and reach them in only the most relevant brand-safe contexts. I think as we progress, we had a great conversation, very brief one, about how the CRM and using CRM data to kind of project insights onto the programmatic landscape to identify high-value audiences is going to be more and more of status quo, and using really rich data resources together to identify those opportunities. I mean, as a DSP, I mean, we sit on top of 250,000 opportunities per second. So being able to identify really those specific audiences, but not just the audiences, but the context of those opportunities that really have the highest propensity to deliver value to our clients is most important. So we're very heavy on AI, and that's really what we strive to do.
Hey everyone, I'm Doug Rosen, Chief Digital and Innovation Officer at OMD, large media agency. I just want to point out the irony of us talking about AI in a room filled with oil paintings, grandfather clocks, and leather-bound books. So my job is quite simple: to architect the demise of my job. And that's in order to make digital not be a channel, but a mindset that both us internally and our clients can embrace. As it relates to AI, I'm actually on a personal and professional mission to kill the artificial word in AI, because the last thing this industry needs is actually more artificial. And I like to submit that we need artful intelligence, not artificial intelligence, and finding ways that organizations can find great utility, simple utility, through the use of machine to help us be better people, be better marketers, be better whatever it might be.
Awesome. I want to set the stage next and talk about a couple of sort of examples of things that are AI or machine learning related. Things that may have come across your desk could be a very simple thing where you're like, you know what, if we could write some scripts, come up with some algorithms, we could make that workflow smoother. Or it could be a really interesting consumer experience. A quick example I have is we were making a recommendation engine for a product, large data set, a brand new data set, and I learned a hell of a lot about metadata and how many cycles of metadata one needs on a piece of data before you can actually have a machine learning algorithm kick in and actually deliver something really precise to a customer. And it was quite an education, but I'd love to hear any examples from you guys of stuff that you've seen, heard. That'd be great. After you, any of you jump in?
You got the platform, so you want to start? And
Sure.
I can.
I mean, metadata is critical, right? We use metadata. Our contextualization of media really revolves around metadata. And how we use metadata is we aggregate that on an audience level. So we basically use that to segment and really to kind of distill a deeper understanding of what the media is about. So for example, what metadata looks like, maybe it makes sense to kind of define what that is. It's a structured way of looking at what unstructured data is, like a piece of text. How do you bring order and structure to that, where you can have something like a machine learning algorithm provide those types of insights and stratification and pivoting to find that performance. So, for example, we use the NLP, natural language processing, metadata collection, scrape a web page, understand what's on that. But then we also heavily invest in computer vision, so identifying what video, what's happening in the video. Can we aggregate that all to kind of bring a more holistic view of what that person is interested in any given moment along their journey?
Gotcha.
I think one of the things that we need to be mindful of in AI, no matter what it is that there's the learning component. And I think very often we think we'll just turn on this machine and boom, right away it'll start doing what we envision it to do. And it takes time, and that time could be years depending on the learning that we want it to achieve. So I think there's this expectation management that's really critical around AI and machine learning, around the machine understanding the data. and processing it appropriately.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of that goes towards understanding intent versus signal. So I know that I'm sure a lot of you have heard the famous Paris Hilton example. I mean, I know that it's one that I've heard a lot. You go to Google and you type Paris Hilton, and you're either going to get results about Paris Hilton or about a hotel in Paris.
Is that the same as Orlando Bloom?
Yes, exactly.
A flower shop.
Flower shop, yeah. So it's a good example that really kind of describes, really putting data pieces together to understand intent or mindset versus, just reading kind of a signal, kind of taking it at face value, and more of like a binary if X then Y kind of solution. And I think what AI or the promise of AI delivers is really that level of intelligence that can tie all the data pieces together to make a personal connection. And that personal connection needs to go beyond just a a single instance of a search query. It needs to be extended beyond that, and it really needs to evolve kind of with the consumer as the consumer is getting deeper and deeper into engagement with the brand.
Chris, I was going to say to you too, is we were talking earlier about getting all of the data sets into one place. Recent project where when you're doing product design, right, it literally is the customer interaction in the product itself, but all the way through to go to market, all of those data points together sounds like getting our data in order so we can actually live up to the promise of AI. But we were talking about like different data sets. You had some examples of how to aggregate them together. And
yeah, I mean, if you look at the programmatic ecosystem now, I mean, it's super fragmented. Even just to run a digital campaign that's programmatic, I mean, typically you have a client, you have the agency, you have a DSP or vendor, and then you have the SSP, you have the DMP. And all of those components are tied together typically through MSAs and Excel sheets, right? So that's really the tough part that, I think that because of the fragmentation, it really limits the amount of command and control that you can have over your own data. But my hope is that over time, through consolidation to a degree, but which is an interesting word, but some sort of consolidation of the data set and ownership of that data inside the brand's CRM or souped up CRM. That's kind of what we're working on now. But really centralizing all that data where you can have something like an AI or a machine learning algorithm at least start looking at that data with respect to outcomes, and that's really kind of the crux of that. I think right now, and agency folks feel free to jump in, but there's a lot of heuristical marketing, right? There's personas that we get from a brief, right, and we'll use some data that we have together to kind of reach that target audience. But in a perfect world where AI is able to understand the granularity of it, there really is no heuristics, right? It's data driven. It's outcomes based, and looking at all the different signals to really drill down and make that perfect connection. Yeah. So that's kind of our approach that we look at it.
I feel like the persona is a key artifact of some of the. It feels like it's going to start to work its way into some of the early work that we do. As an example, my world is about a behavioral persona versus a brand persona. So I can actually capturing habits of different users and what they do, which again I think is along the lines of what we're talking about. Another question for you guys. Is AI an initiative, department, philosophy, or overall movement within your company?
Yes.
That was an easy answer, Doug.
I mean, well, it can't be a department. It's got to live across multiple departments. So I've got a mobile group, and that group is looking at AI from a chatbot perspective. We have Analect, which is the Omnicom Media Group data platform, and they're looking at, and we've actually built and launched at Can Alby, which is a utility bot that we're using to minimize work within the agency. We've got our social team looking at machine learning around structured versus unstructured data. So it's living and breathing across a lot of different places. I think the biggest need is education. Just like any emerging media, whether it was mobile, social, or VR, or whatever might come next, Zephyrs or whatever. Yeah. We need to educate the agency on what it is, and then we need to educate our clients on what it is. And sure. I think that's where we're taking the time right now, and I'd probably guess all of us are spending a lot of time with our clients and within our agencies on really trying to demonstrate and break down what is AI.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, AI will never get as much traction as we want if it becomes a departmental thing or if it just gets buried in data and analytics or just the digital practice. I think it has to really live across the entire organization, because if you look at someone who sits in strategy, that should fundamentally change how they approach their job, what they tap into to develop, how they're going to appropriately tackle business challenges, as an example. But we've already seen, obviously, the use of data and how that would affect someone who sits in more of a creative role, but same thing. AI is going to fundamentally change how they approach their roles and responsibilities. So if the worst thing that I think can happen is that it sits just within a single department, and that we hope that ultimately it kind of like cascades down to the rest of the organization. I think the organization as a whole has to buy into it.
Yeah, and I guess it impacts everyone. I mean, again, this transformation we're sort of embarking on, it kind of impacts every role, every workflow, or it certainly has the potential to do it. I guess, Doug, too, you can see, too, in terms of client education, or maybe eagerness from a client, you can start to pull the pieces together around like where the opportunities are, where to kind of spread the knowledge internally. You can start to see the early signs.
Yeah, certainly there are a couple of areas that we're seeing around. One is around audience development and persona development, using machine learning to help us get there faster, in real time or near real time. The other simple areas have been around dynamic creative, using machines to help us atomize assets, so that then we can deliver messaging to an audience that's very specific. But there's also simple things like chatbots. We're all probably looking at some form of chatbot, which there's little instances of AI built into those things. So I think a lot of times we might think that AI is this big, beast of an engine down in the basement. But it could be these really lightweight utilities that enable great customer service or great targetability or whatever it might be used for.
Yeah, I mean, even we were talking about that in the hallway earlier, and it's like A/B testing, right? When you're creating a new homepage or a new app or something, right? And you're creating 4 different pieces of it or 4 different versions of it, and aligning with different customers and stuff like that. It's kind of like you're saying, it's kind of along the same lines, right? However, I will say from an education standpoint, sometimes with clients or educations, to understand how important it is to do that, it's still very hard, and we're talking about a big leap here, right? With some of the potential of these things, but we were talking about reviewing basic analytics, how you design a homepage using A/B testings and stuff, mobile first. A lot of these initiatives that started when new waves of the internet were kicking, and these were the ways to sort of align that. And still today, it's pretty hard. I don't know, you guys find it, but
yeah, I think from at least what I see with clients, there's still an element of not fully understanding what AI is, or because there's such a wide spectrum, of what it is. And I love the artful intelligence kind of definition. I think we're still trying to figure out kind of where it lives. We're actually in a unique position that we have, IBM as one of our clients at WPP, so we get to do a lot of great work with Watson, knowing that there are a lot of applications of processing data that we've been using for many years. Programmatic, I think, is a great example of machine learning. But the ability to kind of take that to the next level and leverage a system that can take in more data, process it quicker, and predict more accurate outcomes, I think is really where the kind of the tangible kind of promise of AI or machine learning comes into play. It's really about making sure that with all this data that we have, let's make the best use of it, and let's make sure that we're activating it in an environment where it's going to be as useful as it can be. And I think programmatic, dynamic creative, chatbots, those are all really great examples of where we're trying to go with it.
Another question for you guys. So as a practitioner of user-centered design, the concept of customer first, I'd love to talk about any examples or any ideas around how to get that thinking, either with your colleagues or with clients or projects. Anything that you've tried or seen that you think is a good way to start that concept of customer first?
I mean, one thing we're exploring with a real-time platform that only allows you to have 140 characters typically is how to use chatbots for customer service for a couple of our clients, an insurance client, an automotive client, where instead of tweeting the client, you're tweeting an object. And based on machine learning, based on certain algorithms, will take you in certain directions to get you that information faster. So that's great for the customer because they're getting a wonderful user-driven experience. It's great for the organization because they don't have to man customer service desks or whatever it might be to fulfill those requests in all time. And it could be quick and fast and simple. So I think we're starting to explore in those type of areas as a great simple way of doing user design, text-based.
And I think what we're trying to do is putting the customer first means understanding this very, very quickly evolving kind of ecosystem where users have an enormous amount of touch points. They have the expectation of personalization in some areas, but not others. And I think a good example of that is every time I go to Amazon, I expect kind of a personal concierge to, drop hints about every single product I need because that's the experience that I've just come to expect from Amazon. But in that same vein, if it's a brand that I'm not familiar with, personalization I think can have kind of that inverse effect, which is we have to understand where personalization, where dynamic creative, or where the application of some forms of AI are going to be most useful, where the user is or where the customer is in their journey or what their intent is. So I think picking our spots and making sure that when we are solving for these problems, we're doing so through the lens of finding solutions for customers. I think that's an important aspect, and I also think it's important to invest in your brand so that when it comes time to bring solutions to customers, you're already a well-known entity and you can actually influence their decision journey.
And just another comment on that too.
Yep.
I mean, we're always trying to think of new ways to bring insights derived from the data from, for example, the campaign log level data, using the analyses that we have, such as signal identification, to say, hey, these are actually a segment of your audience or a segment of your customers here have these attributes that are very similar. What can we do about designing an experience for that certain very niche segment or target audience that you can design for that? For example, we had a client that they're a small bank based out of just north of Miami, Florida. And we discovered that there was a Russian-speaking population that existed maybe 25 miles away from where the bank was headquartered. And what we ended up doing is we tested using Russian creatives for those users. And the response rate was, I think it was like 4x what we were getting from the other channels. So just another example of using data as insights and then using it as a feedback mechanism of saying, how do we create new ways to reach and channel to your customers in that case?
Yeah, there's a fine line between brilliance and creepiness. And I think it's trying to understand where that is. And we've all probably have said, oh my God, that's brilliant use of personalization, or oh my God, that's so creepy. And I think it's finding the where that line is and making sure you don't cross it, and using the signals and understanding of the fact that there was that Russian population. That's brilliant. But if all of a sudden you're sharing data with me that I don't think you should have, that's where it starts to get creepy. So it's understanding where that is, I think, is really important.
Just hearing your answers here too, it makes me think of like the concept of iterative design or iterative creation. So, one of the things that we've started to do is a lot of prototyping. And early on, as we've got core archetypes or core personas, and we start creating prototypes of different ideas. And once we start testing those, I've actually really enjoyed participating in the testing too, and just more that one-to-one with people that represent those archetypes. And the insights you get, not just from a product standpoint, so you've come up with a feature, an idea. If you're doing the go-to-market strategy as well, you can take that idea and you're like, okay guys, just take that idea and figure out how would you market that? Like how would you tell someone about that? And I think you could go all the way to your examples there, right? Which is like in certain audiences, in certain locations, you could even just go off and sort of test those ideas. You haven't even built the product yet, but just to kind of see like what's our path through. And
well,
so
in some cases, you don't even need to do that. You could feel that in an environment where, because of machine learning and predictive capabilities, we can get results back without actually wasting dollars from an impression standpoint or what have you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a good point. I was going to ask about analytics and a kind of a setting question for analytics and how clients use them, how briefs are used today. I have a little bit of a theory. Recently, we were talking about that. We all know the importance of analytics, and you can get some very clear information from them. I just don't know if everybody wants to make business decisions off them. I don't know if that's unfair or too harsh a thought, but if you because before we start looking at analytics and AI type solutions, right? We start looking at how do we record this stuff? How do we understand what's happening? I'm trying to get a sense of how we're using analytics today before we jump ahead. Anything there from you guys?
Well, related to that, I think that inevitably what we'll have is that AI or some sort of cognitive computing will be able to take the heavy lifting of data analysis off the shoulders of your analysts today. You'll start to see a lot more fast data, which is quick, actionable data, not necessarily big data. I think that's very important for decision makers at organizations to have access to those insights about their products, about their customers, so that they can make timely decisions. Yeah. Ultimately, it's about a human-machine kind of scalable system where you have the machines that are doing the analyses, but then you have, which really relinquishes the human, marketer in this case, to do what they do best, which is storytelling, and being able to piece together the intuitiveness of what's actually happening underneath the hood.
Yeah, I don't think a machine will place insights.
Yeah.
Insights still need to come from us, but machines will allow us to get to insights faster if done right.
Yeah. Nor should it make decisions for us. I think we have to keep in mind that there's still a lot of value in using gut and instinct in making decisions in many instances.
Yeah.
I still feel like, and I know there was a previous conversation around mood marketing and how creepy that can be or how unethical it can be. I still don't believe, I'm not convinced at this point in time that AI can tell us how we can best emotionally connect with customers or people, because that's one of the most unpredictable things that are out there, So I think that's where still creativity and business instincts really need to come into play.
The problem with that too is that we're optimizing typically for a hard metric like ROAS or CPA, right? And we're not really capturing the emotional connection in the optimization. Yeah. So that, and again, I don't have the answer to this question, but that could be something that is an opportunity point for sure.
Yeah, and I think I've heard this kind of come up as a theme today around the focus on DR and that tangible metric that we're able to kind of actually optimize against. And I'll go back to one of my earlier points, which I think that as an industry, we tend to operate like a kid's soccer game where everyone's just chasing the ball and no one has any idea what the goal is. And there's a piece here that I think is really important. We try to convey this to our clients as clearly as possible, which is this is a solution, but it's not the only solution, right? So investing in your brand, making sure that in addition to those tangible KPIs that a machine can actually learn and optimize against is important. But it's also important to invest in things like TV. It's important to make emotional connections. It's important to kind of let people know what the identity of your brand is. That's kind of the basis and the foundation for everything that we do as marketers.
See, I think actually, though, in a period of time, AI, whatever that artful intelligence, will be able to drive to an emotional understanding. That's not now. That's not going to be for the next couple of years. Because a key point in that, and I use my mom as my test example. Like, if my mom understands something, then it's mainstream. It's worked so far in the 20-some-odd years I've done digital. Yeah. And she has no clue what the hell AI is. But she knows about this notion of trusting machines to do things, right? And we've been slowly, conditioning ourselves as people to trust machines. We're now seeing it with Alexas and the home assistants, so more and more we're going to trust machines, and as we trust machines, then the emotionality will come into play. Right now it's very rational, and that's okay because we're at the early stages.
I wonder, and I totally agree that I think that emotional connection will come in time. I just wonder if the consumer is going to be as open to that emotional connection through a machine as they would be knowing that, that kind of personal, people-based connection that we've worked so hard to create around brands. I think a lot of it's going to be dictated by what is going to be welcomed or what is going to be considered kind of inspiring.
Well, I think the more we get to natural interaction with machines, one of the big trends we're following right now is this notion of human as interface, right? And we're seeing more and more where like voice-based search, or we're not clicking and pointing anymore. We're just using us as people to interact with machines. Yeah. And the other thing we're seeing is machines start to take on humanoid characteristics. So you've got the Curies and the Peppers and these little robots that are starting to be cute little things that go around the homes, what have you. The more that happens, that machine becomes personified as human, and we interact with that, I think the more we'll be willing, and again, this isn't next year, don't write this in your plans, but I think, in 3 years' time, 5 years, 10 years, without a doubt, we'll be looking at this evisceration of where we see a machine versus man kind of interact.
Is it time for the T-1000 reference yet?
Yeah, or Skynet?
Part of every AI.
Yeah. Well, I think, to your point, Sue, I mean, I think a couple of brand examples. Uber is a very interesting one. The good stuff about Uber in terms of it really did meet the masses, right? Like, it was super simple. I mean, I think that was part of, for your mum, for example, is that, a couple of taps on a device that she was already familiar with, and, getting to the grocery store, going to visit you was just the simplest thing she's ever done before. And she doesn't have to deal with driving and traffic lights and all, like the fulfillment, like the sort of like, oh my God, this technology, although it's a phone, I just clicked a couple of buttons, was in the back. And I think the recommendation engine stuff from Netflix, it's an old example. They open sourced their recommendation engine many years ago because they saw how important it was. And then the profiling when you open that, it's all still simple. It hasn't changed a whole lot, but I think they're really good examples of that kind of technology, right?
Yeah, and I think those are great examples of being solutions-based, right? So it's so much easier to communicate the value of that engine when you understand a problem and are able to offer a solution that's as easy as signing up for Uber or just opening up a Netflix application and cutting down the time it takes to find what content you want to watch next.
Yeah, yeah. Another question for you guys around automated creative narratives. I read that Coke, for example, was doing sort of more intensive sentiment analysis and looking at all the different things that they're doing globally and really trying to spend time and energy on that effort, because then they could obviously turn that around and start to look at creative once they understand that, and maybe there's more of an automated approach to creative. If anyone from Coke's here or whatever, I'm not quoting, I had associated that. But what are your thoughts around that, around creative being controlled? And it could be creative app experiences as much as content, as much as marketing.
I think it's a huge opportunity. It's something we're spending a lot of time in right now. That's probably one of the key areas of where we're putting machine learning or AI that people can actually see it.
Yeah.
A lot of places we're putting it is more for internal systems, data accessibility, things like that. You can't really see it or touch it. Yeah. But dynamic creative is an area where we actually are putting it out in the market. In some cases, we're able to test creative before we do that, as I said before, so we can get some level of prediction or understanding of how it might run. And so I think we're going to see more and more of that. It's just smart use of technology more than fancy AI.
Sure.
And how do you control for those experiences? Like, if you have an AI that's assembling, and maybe you don't have the answer to this, but for creative that's assembled by AI, like I'd imagine that, what's to stop it from going off on a tangent and putting pink for everything or blacking out the screen, right?
Well, it doesn't eliminate the need for humans. So there's still human review in this, but there's the opportunity. I mean, we're talking about scale. My clients are billion-dollar spenders. So the scale in a programmatic instance is 7, 8, 9 digits. And so we have to think about how do we scale the message to scale the audience. We're one of I think the biggest challenges with programmatic at times is the fact that we can get down to infinite hundreds of audiences, but we're still going with 1 or 2 messages. Yeah. And so I think what AI or machines can help us with is on the dynamic creative to get down to that level of messaging to match the media.
I was just going to say real quick, creatives, actually sitting working with creatives, and I think, Doug, you work closely with creatives. How are they embracing the possibilities? I mean, you're at the whiteboard and trying to think through this.
Well, it doesn't change the creative, because what we're talking about is taking a framework of a brand and atomizing it out, parsing it out, so that we still relish and work closely with the creatives who have to build out this framework. But now they have to think about not just a locked, ad unit, but something that we can unlock and take the pieces and parts and do things with it. It actually can be liberating for the right type of creatives.
Absolutely.
In terms of thinking about all the different permutations and opportunities.
I'm bought into the idea of using AI and data to essentially piece together dynamic creative. I go back to when it's time to actually concept the idea. That's where I still struggle with a little bit. Right. Your example of the Coke ad, just because you can do it doesn't mean that it's a good thing, that it's going to produce the best work necessarily. And I know AI can help put together a spot. It can help put together a movie trailer. It's written songs. It's written articles. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that it's necessarily the best work, because I go back to a big part of our job is to make sure that we're emotionally connecting with people, and I just don't know if machines can do that. Right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's a lot of brands, a lot of artists have succeeded without using any data whatsoever. People didn't know they wanted an iPhone or an iPod. There's no data that informed that. The Beastie Boys, right? No one told them, hey, data tells you should mix alt rock and hip hop together. And I mean, there's still stuff that I don't know if AI can necessarily or should influence, is what I'm getting at. And I'm like I said, I'm all in, so I don't want to seem like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. Like I'm fascinated by AI, but I'm also, I guess, more on the realistic side in terms of what it can and maybe shouldn't do just at this point. 10 years from now, maybe it's different, but anyways, that's kind of the position I take.
Well, I think a lot of it too, I think those are all very good points, right? And being able to use some sort of cognitive intelligence or some sort of algorithmic way to say, these are the things that are most important to 60% of your audience. Yeah. If you're an auto manufacturer, gas efficiency, obviously, right? Electric car, right? Electricity, in this case, safety, right? These are all very substantive, core to your brand, things that you need to be messaging about. But what about the more latent stuff, perhaps maybe it's a point of gathering of your family on the way to the soccer game, right? These are understanding it all comes from understanding your audience. So can you piece together using contextualization that the majority of your buyers are families between 25 and 44, right? You can if you have the right data points, and that's really kind of where the insights generation comes from, and using the data that you have readily available, but then things like segmenting based on performance, like who are your customers, and then what do you know about them? And I think this also goes back to merging into the CRM, and then creating those virtuous feedback cycles between your programmatic buys, right, or your ad buys, and then filtering that back into deterministic data sets that you have about those customers.
It feels like too, and I think a lot of these generations of the internet, where it's it has some ways been tech first. It feels like at this point the firepower of the tech needs emotions first, right? If we can start to figure out these archetypes or figure out emotions to technology, we can start to succeed at some of the things you're talking about. Simple examples too in terms of stepping stones. We were brainstorming earlier around Amazon's dynamic pricing. I'm looking at a dynamic price that's specific to me because obviously they have so much data about me. If that's an ad on a page and it actually had the specific price in the ad, and we can start control the content and the video around that ad, it starts to feel like a very different experience. It's not just an ad on a page. The whole shape of that experience can start to do something really quite different.
And that can create an emotional power for the brand. So again, I don't think machines will start kicking out award-winning work. There's actually an interesting the Tribeca Film Festival did a project this year. We actually had it as part of our Cannes programming, where they had an AI judge. And the AI judge failed miserably in some regards, but brilliantly got to some answers that the real judges didn't really think about. So it's not that machines will replace man or woman. It's just they'll help us to do things faster, better, stronger, that sort of thing.
It's a tool, right? It's a new paradigm. It's a new tool, right? And ultimately, it's still going to be the humans who are in control of it.
Awesome. I see the man standing up there. Sir.
Yeah, we can take questions from the audience now, if there are any. Oh, over here, Mr. Sussman. Please tell us who you are and where you work. Thank you.
My name is Andrew Sussman. I cover New York for Empower, and I'm with a new company called Emoto as well. Now, emotion has come up 5 to 6 times today as the next thing. And high-tech, high-touch was mentioned by Toffler in the 70s. And marketers have known for a long time they need to focus on the 95% that matters, which is the emotional. Hello, Doug. The gentleman referred to Apple, and you have to wonder why Mac sales or iMac sales boomed after they introduced color, which is totally non-functional. We had focus groups, but we couldn't qualify it. And just as a point of fact to people, as a source of information, on March 30th of this year, it turned out whether you watch America's Got Talent or Tosh.0 on Tuesday night says a lot about you, like the gentleman from Spotify said. So on the main stage of the Advertising Research Foundation on March 30th of this year, it was announced the largest innovation that's validated since purchaser targeting, and it was according to the ARF, the TV shows you watch can offer marketers key insights into your personality. That's validated to a R-squared 7.7 and is the most predictive measurement according to David Poltrack of TV ratings in the last 40 years. So that data does exist and should be used. That's just a point of information. And my question is, how do you make charming robots? A robot that can be a scintillating socialite, or a robot that can be an empathetic Jewish mother?
I don't know which one I want, personally.
I'll take them both.
Since I brought up my mother already.
Charming robots.
I mean, it goes back to, from my perspective, what I said. It's going to take time. These machines need to learn for, in the case, Andrew, to get to what you're talking about, years. And we're seeing some stuff now where, machines have been learning for a long time, and it's still like you're talking to a third grade, and so to get to this very elegant and charming, amazing utopian state, we're many years from there. But the groundwork is being laid across institutions, Silicon Valley's beaches and alleys on how AI will get there. So it's starting now, but it's going to take time.
I mean, the core algorithm.
You probably know it more than all of us.
The core algorithms that really have enabled things like Google Translate to be amazingly more accurate just over the last 6 months to 12 months. Those algorithms really have only become tractable to and actually realistic over the last 2-3 years. That's really from the advent of cloud computing and really GPU, graphical processing, being kind of the new core standard for deep learning. We're still very much in its infancy. I mean, it's going to be time, and it takes a lot of data. But there are a lot of active research happening around the idea of using smaller and smaller and smaller data sets to inform and to help train these algorithms to learn qualities of emotion. I think, again, it's going to be a while, but it's certainly not something that's going to happen tomorrow.
I think Alexa and I think conversational UIs with bots are the start of personality and emotion. I don't think they're to the example you're giving, but they're the concept is, and it's enlightening. And when you're talking to people about bots or conversational UIs, they see that interface, and I think that's actually part of the problem, because they're like, that's not a person. And then you're like, no, but it actually has emotion. It actually can do things that represent a feeling as you interact.
I think IBM's done a great job with Watson and humanizing it and making it feel very approachable.
Yeah, and I know that in the relaunch of the new iPhone, Apple made adjustments to make Siri's voice sound more personal. So I think we're already kind of seeing that trend develop. But I also think that from a user standpoint, the expectations are getting higher and higher. I mean, you can put a bot together, and I mean, I can show you text messages from my relatives over the age of 65, and like they kind of communicate through text message, like similar to that of a chat bot. So I think you can get away with a lot now, but as new generations kind of grow up in a world where interaction through digital means is just more, there's a higher comfort level around it. I think the bar is being raised every day to make sure that that emotional connection is really on point.
Okay, Ian, we're out of time. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, panel.
Thanks, guys.
A round of applause. Thank you.